let me just give you a background of this work. This work has been done with the IGC, Pakistan, for the government of Punjab, and it uses two data sets. The first one is the Investment Climate Assessment Survey, which was done for the first time by the World Bank in 2002 and then later in 2006-07. So we're going to use the 2006-07 data set, but at the cluster level. So sector and cluster level within the Punjab. There was a report which came based on this in 2009, Investment Climate Report, which did not go down to this micro level. It was more to the provincial level and at the aggregate or national level. So the idea is, as I said, to give a more microscopic view of the clusters, the various clusters in Punjab, and what are their key constraints in terms of industrial growth, productivity, cost of production, and so on. Now, the second data set which we use, and hence this makes this preliminary study, is a pilot survey which we conducted, LUMS team conducted in Lahore in February. So this was concentrated in the Lahore zone. We looked at 101 firms. Okay, so that essentially tells us how firms now prioritize constraints as compared to 2006-07 and what are their perceived costs. And then also what we've added on are the coping mechanisms firms use and what's the additional delta in terms of cost because of these coping mechanisms. So I'm going to skip a few slides because I've covered this. So as I said, two data sources. One is ICA 2006-07 and the second is our own pilot survey which is used for this very preliminary study. So there's a long list of constraints. There are a total of 14 which range from constraints which are physical infrastructure, factors of production, market governance, bureaucratic, corruption issues and so on. There's a long list, you can have a look at it, access to finance, access to land, corruption, crime and disorder. And the whole point is that the firms basically prioritize these. So these are the main, so we looked at the 7 main industrial zones within Punjab. Here we have 6. The 7th one is Wazirabad, which is in the Gujranwala district. So interestingly, this covers the sort of the triangle, the famous golden triangle where most of the manufacturing activity takes place in the country. Now, just a very quick look at the macro issues. I mean, this basically is growth of GDP and industrial growth aggregate in Pakistan, and it shows the movement past cycles. So how things were in 2002, it picked up. Industrial productive growth also picked up. GDP growth picked up, although most of it was consumption driven. And then as soon as macro stability, political instability, and finding any energy constraint kicked in, things went down drastically in 2006-2007. So when the 2006-2007 survey was conducted, things were sliding down, so to speak. This is Punjab, which is in almost tandem with that of the country, given that most of 45-50% of industry of Pakistan is in Punjab. Now this is again disaggregated, again Punjab industry. If you look at the red line, that's large-scale manufacturing. It shows the secular decline post-2006-07, and it's not quite picked up. We don't have recent figures there, but I've looked it up, State Bank data, and those are not that promising. Its growth has been negative. It's slightly picked up as 1.5% this particular year. That's not much at all. Now this is how firms have prioritized constraints over the past 10 years. So we have both 2002 data, and this is the entire country, 2007, and the pilot which we've done this year in February 2012. Now what is interesting to see here, if you look at 2002, these are the most severe constraints according to industry. So political instability was considered back in 2002 as the most severe constraint, followed by corruption and then electricity. So 39.3% firms viewed electricity as the most. And this is when the energy constraints started to hit the industry. And now down to 2012, although this is just Lahore division, Lahore zone, but it's indicative of the extent of the problem. 95.3, almost all firms consider this as the most severe constraint. What are the endemic constraints? Corruption is an endemic constraint. Inadequate workforce is an endemic constraint. Macroeconomic instability / political instability is an endemic constraint. Now this is the Punjab 2007 ranking of constraints. As I said, electricity takes the lead, followed by macroeconomic instability, corruption, access to finance, tax rates, and so on. This is our Lahore pilot, which has just been conducted in February. Electricity is still number one, but as I said, almost all firms rate it as the most severe constraint, followed by macroeconomic and political instability, and then inadequate workforce, access to raw material, access to finance, and so on, corruption also. Now this is the impact across clusters of power shortages, which is very, very interesting. If you look at this impact, it's annual sales loss. These are guesstimates. These are perceptions of firms, remember, so it's not any sort of very rigorous empirical estimation. So these are guesstimates done by firms themselves. So this is annual sales loss across the 7 clusters. And what you see is in the golden triangle, the loss is the highest. So in particular, Faisalabad, Gujranwala, Sialkot, and Wazirabad. These are the manufacturing hubs of the country, and also the export hubs. So when you're talking about greater sort of global competition and our sort of potential trading with India and the rest of the world, so such a high increase or decrease in annual sales, does not quite bode well. And this is purely because of power shortages. So Gujranwala, Faisalabad, Wazirabad, Sialkot are clear outliers. Lahore, Rawalpindi, Shekhupura are not that high. This is 2007. Now, what this does is this looks at within across clusters. This picks out the particular sector which is hurt the most, the industry which is hurt the most. And if you look at, for example, Gujranwala, where the garments industry is facing, in 2007 was facing 50% annual sales loss. Now that's exorbitantly high. Wazirabad food sector, that's small-scale food sector, 40% annual sales loss. Followed by Faisalabad, again food. Most of these are continuous process industries, which suffer the most because of unannounced power outages. This is across the 5 major sectors in the Punjab. What are sort of annual sales loss, again in 2007. And pharmaceuticals heads this particular chart, followed by machinery and equipment, garments, textiles. So if you look at garments, textiles, food processing, this is where our comparative advantage lies, and we're very fast losing it. It's being eroded in the past 5 or 6 years since 2006, 2007 because of these power outages. Now this is a comparison. So this is the 2012 pilot survey which we did in Lahore, and comparing it to the situation in the Lahore zone in 2007. And this is average number of outages, power outages during a month. The golden ones are those in 2007. Okay, on the x-axis you have the frequency of outages, and the light blue ones are 2012. And you can see the clear deterioration of the situation in terms of the power crisis. Back in 2007, outages ranged from around 15, 16 to 34. Most of the firms reporting 35.2% reporting between 0 to 19. 30.3% between 20 to 34, and there were very few which reported power outages anywhere in excess of 30. But now look at the situation currently. Mind you, this pilot was done in February, so the situation now perhaps is even more severe. So now the situation is 58% of the firms report 45 to 99 outages, unannounced outages per month, 31.8%, 100 and more. This translates to more than 2 outages in February, more than 2 outages per month. Now this results in the following: sales lost due to power outages. Again, comparison of 2007 Lahore zone and 2012 again in the Lahore zone. And you see back in 2007, This is again firms estimates. 67.9% firms considered the losses because of power outages to be less than 10%. Now, 19.1%, 11 to 20, 37.1% compared to 2.4% back in 2007. 37.1% consider it to be greater than 20%. So how goes any competitiveness given such figures? Okay. So if you look at average sales losses, this is the average which I've written down. Average sales loss in Lahore currently is around 15%. And compared to 2007 is 7%, so 100% increase. So this is again the Lahore pilot survey. It picks out outliers which are being hurt the most in terms of sales loss. And those are circled, it's food, chemicals, non-metallic minerals and printing. Okay. Now these are coping mechanisms which firms use, and let me just reiterate something very important. It's normally the medium to large size firms which can sort of afford generators. So these coping mechanisms are more relevant to medium and large size firms. So if you look at this, 73% of firms are using generators to cope with electricity shortages. What does that translate into cost increase? So here is again a back of the envelope sort of a calculation. Cost using a generator fueled by diesel is around rupees 48 per unit of electricity relative to 13 rupees per unit from the national grid. So there's a delta of 3, so multiple of 3, okay, if you switch over to a generator usage. So other coping mechanism used by firms, and this is again the pilot survey, overtime. 57.5% firms resort to overtime, increased shift timings 15%, increased work week 15%. What does that lead to? Increased working hours of labor. So that definitely leads to lower productivity of labor. So impact on overall costs of firms perceive that because of all this, around 27.6% firms perceive that their impact on overall cost is between 10 to 20%. 37.9% feel that it's greater than 20%. We also looked at other constraints, remember. So electricity, the power outages were ranked as the most important, most severe constraint, followed by others. Here I've taken a sample of some. So corruption is again one of the endemic problems. So here's a percentage of total annual sales paid as informal payments. This is across clusters. So here the clear outliers are Wazirabad and interestingly Faisalabad. And primarily the textile industry in Faisalabad because of greater contact with labor inspectors. So the greater contact an industry has with bureaucracy, the greater would be the incidence of corruption. So these are very, very high figures in terms of total annual sales paid as informal payments. So where do the most bribes go to? So according to firms, they pay the most to labor inspectors, followed by electricity officials, and then the boiler inspectors come. Okay. All right, so this is again another important constraint, which is low labor skills. So this is average education attainment. So average education attainment varies dependent on the type of industry. So in electronics and printing, perhaps chemicals, you'll find higher average education attainment, but the sort of across the war zone, the average is around 6 to 7 years, so under metric labor. Okay. And when we talk about sort of progressing or structural transformation or moving to higher value added, this is one of the most binding constraints we face. So let me just wrap up. I mean, what are the highlights of this initial research? First, obviously, energy crisis has significantly worsened since 2007. Outages have more than doubled, and so have the losses, especially in the Lahore zone. Sectors which are outliers, unfortunately, it's our golden triangle in in terms of impact of power outages. Gujranwala, Wazirabad, Faisalabad and Sialkot are worst hit. Within that, industries which are worst hit, garments, food, pharmaceuticals. Second important constraint, macroeconomic instability. Here we talked about inflation, exchange rate depreciation, cost of imported goods. Then obviously higher interest rate, and this is more relevant for the large-scale industries in terms of increasing cost of capital. Corruption, as I mentioned, is an endemic problem. Lack of transparency and clarity in laws and regulations are used for end-seeking by bureaucratic officials. Labor skill shortages continue to be a binding constraint to firm productivity. Finally, access to capital, especially for smaller firms, smaller and medium-sized firms with less than 15 or 10 employees. So their credit ration. So it's not only lack of collateral which results in credit rationing, it's also the high cost of entering the market. I mean, the procedural requirements of commercial banks are, for them, for the small firm, are too high in terms of cost. They don't understand it, they can't fill out forms and so on. So hence the progression or the growth of small to medium and medium to large is inhibited. Thank you very much. As I said, this is a preliminary study. So we are planning to extend this survey to all the clusters within the Punjab, the 7 clusters. Thank you very much.